The land had been quiet for years. It sat just outside town, open and wide, with long grass that moved slowly when the wind passed through. At the back of the property, near a line of old trees, stood several wooden beehives. They were not new. They had been there for a long time, carefully placed and well looked after. The owner of the land had learned early that bees needed calm, space, and respect. If left alone, they did their work and caused no trouble. The owner lived a simple life. No loud parties. No visitors coming and going. Just daily routines, early mornings, and time spent checking the hives. The bees were not just a hobby. They were a responsibility. Every box was marked, every path planned, every warning sign placed for a reason. Anyone who came close could clearly see the signs asking people to keep their distance. Most people did. On the other side of the land was a large open field owned by a community, a group connected to a homeowners association. Over the years, it had been used for small events. A few tents, here and there. Family picnics. Nothing big. The owner of the land had never had a problem with it. There was enough space for everyone, and the line between properties had always been respected. That started to change when a new HOA representative took charge. She was loud, confident, and always certain she was right. She believed rules only worked when she made them. Neighbors had already had small issues with her. Parking disputes, complaints over fences, arguments about noise that never existed, but none of that reached the landowner's ears at first. One afternoon, while checking the hives, the landowner noticed something unusual. Wooden stakes had been pushed into the ground near the property line. Bright ribbons were tied to them, marking off areas. A closer look showed they were not for farming or repairs. They looked like event markers. Later that same day, a flyer appeared on a nearby notice board. It advertised a large camping event, not a small gathering. Hundreds of campers were expected. Families, groups, and outdoor clubs. The event was approved by the HOA and planned to run for several days. The landowner felt uneasy right away. The location on the flyer showed the event area stretching dangerously close to the beehives. Too close. Anyone familiar with bees would know it was a bad idea. Loud noise, smoke, children running, people wandering without care. It was a recipe for trouble. The next morning, the landowner went to speak with the HOA representative. The conversation was calm at first. The landowner explained the situation clearly. There were active beehives near the edge of the property. Bees followed flight paths. They reacted to movement and sound. Safety zones existed for a reason. The HOA representative waved it off. She said the land was meant to be enjoyed. She said people had a right to camp. She said bees were everywhere, and people should not be afraid of nature. Her tone suggested the matter was already settled. The landowner tried again, slower this time. Mentioned warning signs. Mentioned liability. Mentioned that permission had never been given to use the private land as part of the event. That was when her attitude changed. She crossed her arms and said the HOA had authority over shared spaces and nearby areas. She claimed the campers would stay where they were told. That was not comforting over the next few days. Trucks began arriving. Portable toilets were unloaded. Large tents went up. Campfires were planned. People walked freely, some stepping past the property line without even noticing. A few even leaned on the fence, curious about the wooden boxes behind it. The landowner added more signs. Clear ones. Simple words. Warning of live beehives. Requests to stay back. They were placed where anyone could see them. Still, people laughed, took photos, and treated the signs like decorations. The landowner took photos too. Not for fun. For records. Dates, times, locations. Every sign placed. Every marker moved. Every moment, when the boundary was ignored, the calm of the land began to fade. The bees sensed the change. They moved differently. Their hum grew louder during the day. The landowner noticed it while standing still, listening carefully. Bees always gave signs before trouble started by the end of the week. The event had not even begun, and the problems were already forming. Campers practiced setting up grills. Children ran close to the trees. Music played during the evenings. Smoke drifted in the wrong direction. The landowner stood near the hives one evening, watching the sun go down, knowing this was only the beginning. The warnings had been given. The signs were clear. But respect had been ignored. And when people ignore nature long enough, it always responds. This was not about anger or revenge. It was about boundaries, about listening, about understanding that some rules exist for safety, not control. The landowner hoped even then that someone would step in before things went too far. But the crowd was coming, and no one in charge seemed ready to listen. The quiet land waited. The morning of the first day of the event brought a strange mix of excitement and tension to the land. Campers were arriving in groups, carrying backpacks, tents, and coolers. Laughter and voices filled the air. Birds flitted in the trees. The landowner stood near the hives, observing quietly, a notebook in hand. Warnings had been given, but the first signs of trouble appeared almost immediately. A group of teenagers ran across the edge of the property, kicking a small soccer ball near the beehives. A few campers leaned over the fence, curious about the wooden boxes. One even poked at a hive with a stick, laughing. The landowner rushed over, waving arms and calling out, but by the time anyone responded, the damage had been done. The bees were alert, moving faster, their hum louder than normal. The HOA representative, confident and dismissive, arrived mid-morning. She had already noticed the complaints and thought they were minor. When the landowner tried to speak about the incident with the teenagers, she waved it off. They're just kids. It will be fine. Bees are not dangerous. Let them enjoy themselves. Her tone was firm. She made it clear that she did not want to hear another word. The landowner returned to the hives, adding another layer of warnings, extra signs, bright ribbons, and even a temporary fence to keep people back. But the campers were not deterred. Some took photos of the signs, smiling and ignoring the caution. Others joked about being stung. Few took it seriously. Around midday, music from a speaker system reached the edge of the property. Drums, guitars, and laughter echoed. The bees began to fly in larger numbers. They circled, unsure of the sudden vibrations. The landowner noted it, knowing agitation would increase if the noise continued. The situation was delicate. Bees respond to movement, vibration, and smell. Any one of those could trigger chaos. A small family approached the fence, children in tow. They were excited, pointing at the hives. The father brushed a branch too close to a hive while taking a photo. The landowner ran over, shouting for them to step back. The father apologized but did not move fast enough. A few bees reacted defensively, and the children shrieked. The parents quickly pulled them away. The incident left the landowner tense and worried. Throughout the morning, multiple campers crossed boundaries. Some ignored the signs. Others were unaware. The landowner tried to speak to each one individually, explaining gently but firmly why they needed to stay away. Each conversation was met with laughter, disbelief, or an empty nod. No real understanding, no real care. It felt as if the warnings were invisible to most. By afternoon, the tension in the air had grown. Bees buzzed louder than before. Campers continued to set up grills, tents, and games, unknowingly blocking flight paths. The landowner paced along the edge, watching every movement. Notes were taken: time, location, what was said, and what the campers did. Documentation was important. It could be needed later if things went wrong. The HOA representative passed by again, noticing the landowner's concern. She smiled condescendingly. "You're overreacting. Bees have been around for centuries. They'll be fine. If anyone gets stung, it's their own fault." Her words stung more than the bees. She was in charge, but she did not understand the situation. She refused to listen. As evening approached, some campers started building small fires for cooking. Smoke drifted toward the hives. The landowner waved hands, trying to direct the smoke away, but the campers were too busy. They laughed, shouted, and moved around freely. Each moment increased the risk of bee agitation. By the end of the day, Several campers had minor stings. Nothing serious yet, but enough to create panic in small pockets. Parents began yelling at children, friends tried to comfort one another, and a few campers ran blindly toward the landowner, seeking help or complaining. It was chaotic, and the bees were not done reacting. The landowner knew this was just the beginning. Each time people ignored warnings, the bees became more defensive. Flight paths were blocked. Noise was constant. Vibrations from music, stomping, and playful running were all triggers. By nightfall, every precaution felt small and fragile. The landowner spent the evening adding extra barriers, marking paths more clearly, and speaking to campers politely, trying to instill understanding. Still, some ignored every word. A few took photos of the bees from up close, holding their phones near the hives and laughing. It was reckless, and the landowner could only shake their head. The bees' behavior worsened by the end of the day. Buzzing was louder, circling became more frequent, and subtle warning flights were visible. The landowner could sense it in the quiet moments between camper activity. Nature gives signs. Anyone paying attention would see it. But most campers were too distracted, too excited, or too careless to notice. The night was quiet only for a few hours. Campers were tired, some asleep in tents, some sitting by campfires. The landowner stayed near the hives, watching carefully. Bees rested as well, but the signs of agitation had not disappeared. Tomorrow would be worse if the same patterns continued. The landowner thought about what could happen. One mistake, one careless moment, could trigger a larger response from the bees. Panic could spread. Injuries could occur. The campers had no idea what was at stake. The HOA representative had no concern for safety, and the landowner was left alone, responsible for preventing disaster. By late night, every precaution was doubled. Extra ribbons, signs, temporary barriers, and verbal warnings had been delivered. Still, the anxiety remained. The landowner understood one thing clearly: respect for boundaries in nature is not optional. It is necessary, and without it, chaos is waiting. The landowner went home for a few hours of sleep, knowing it would not be enough. Dawn would bring more campers, more noise, and more risk. The bees would continue their silent watch, and the landowner would need to be ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow would test patience, planning, and courage, more than today had. But one truth was clear: nature was not willing to be ignored. The landowner would stand firm no matter what. The next morning, the sun rose bright and clear over the campsite. Birds chirped in the distance, the wind moved gently through the grass, and everything seemed calm. But the calm was deceptive. The landowner knew that the quiet often comes just before chaos. Campers began arriving earlier than before. Tents went up quickly, equipment was unloaded, and small groups moved toward the edge of the property, as if drawn by curiosity. The landowner moved quickly along the boundary, placing extra warning signs and checking the barriers that had been set up the night before. Every time someone leaned toward the hives, the bees shifted slightly, their hum increasing in volume. There was no aggression yet, only a warning signal. The landowner understood this and stayed alert. By mid-morning, things were already getting tense. A group of teenagers began playing with frisbees and balls near the fence line. Their throws were wild and often landed dangerously close to the hives. The landowner ran over repeatedly, waving arms and shouting, trying to get them to back off. Each time the teenagers laughed or made excuses, moving just enough to avoid immediate contact. Still, the stress on the bees was noticeable. The HOA representative appeared again. She carried herself with the same dismissive attitude as before, smiling as though everything was under control. The landowner tried to explain the risk once more, emphasizing how sensitive bees can be to vibrations, movement, and noise. She waved the concerns away, saying that the campers were careful and no serious harm would come from it. The landowner felt frustration rise, but held their temper, knowing that losing control would only make the situation worse. By late morning, several campers had unknowingly blocked important flight paths for the bees. Some had set up picnic blankets and chairs near the edge of the property, while others wandered freely, snapping photos. One man leaned over the fence trying to take a close-up of the hive. A few bees reacted, buzzing louder and moving in erratic patterns. The landowner ran forward, shouting for him to step back. The man ignored the warning until a few bees flew past him, causing him to stumble backward. He laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Small stings began to occur as the day progressed. A child running with friends accidentally brushed against a low-hanging branch near one hive. 2 bees reacted defensively, stinging the child on the arm. The parents panicked, pulling the child away and yelling at nearby campers. Others started noticing and stepping back, but the incident had already triggered more agitation in the hive. The landowner moved between groups, trying to calm people and maintain control, all while documenting each incident carefully. Around midday, loud music started playing near the center of the campsite. Drums, guitars, and shouting echoed across the open field. The vibrations carried to the hive area, making the bees more alert. The landowner could feel the hum change, the warning signs increasing in intensity. More stings occurred as campers inadvertently blocked flight paths or got too close in curiosity. Panic spread quickly among small groups, with people running, shouting, and trying to escape the buzzing insects. The landowner moved as fast as possible, guiding panicked campers away and waving arms to disperse the crowd. Despite repeated warnings, many campers ignored the signs. Some thought it was funny, others were oblivious. Photographers moved too close to the hives, ignoring the landowner's voice. One camper even tried to lift the lid of a hive to see the bees up close. The bees reacted defensively, flying out in a wave. Several campers screamed and ran, knocking over chairs and blankets. The chaos escalated quickly. By mid-afternoon, emergency calls began. A few campers required minor medical attention for stings. The situation was growing rapidly out of control. The landowner worked tirelessly, moving between groups, trying to manage both people and bees. They reminded everyone about safety, guided them away from the hives, and called for help to contain the situation. But the HOA representative refused to take responsibility, saying it was not her fault and that the landowner should have expected the event to be loud. Parents in group leaders started gathering their children, trying to calm them down. Many campers were frightened by the unexpected aggression of the bees. The landowner explained once again that bees only reacted defensively, and that the behavior was predictable if people ignored boundaries. Some listened, some ignored. The frustration and fear were mounting across the field. The landowner had anticipated this moment, preparing tools and protective equipment in case the bees became fully aggressive. Still, they felt a weight pressing down on them. Hundreds of people, most unaware of the danger they had provoked, were moving in a way that made containment difficult. The bees were now several months had passed since the chaotic camping event. The landowner's property had become a place of learning and reflection for the community. The bees thrived, the hives were intact, and the land remained peaceful. Visitors came regularly, both curious and respectful, to observe the hives and understand the delicate balance of nature and human activity. One morning, the landowner noticed a large group assembling near the edge of the property. Unlike the previous group of careless campers, this gathering had been coordinated with care. Local teachers and community volunteers had organized an educational outing, informing participants ahead of time about the bees, their behavior, and the boundaries that needed to be respected. The landowner greeted them warmly, knowing that preparation and guidance would prevent the mistakes of the past as the group moved into safe zones. The landowner explained how bees communicate and work together. Children asked questions, pointing at bees flying between flowers. Adults listened attentively, impressed by the complexity and importance of the hives. The landowner demonstrated the use of gentle smoke to calm the bees, showing that safety was possible when knowledge and respect were applied. During the demonstration, one child leaned a bit too close to the fence. The landowner quickly stepped in, guiding the child back gently and explaining why proximity could be dangerous. The child nodded, understanding immediately. The difference from the earlier event was clear: when rules are explained and respected, curiosity does not lead to chaos. As the day progressed, campers, students, and visitors moved carefully among the designated areas. They took notes, asked questions, and participated in supervised activities. The landowner encouraged engagement while reinforcing boundaries. It was a balance of curiosity and caution, and the group responded positively. No one was stung, no one panicked, and the bees remained calm, demonstrating that careful planning and respect could coexist with education and interaction. Meanwhile, news from the HOA continued to filter through the community. The HOA Karen had faced further restrictions on her authority, requiring approval from the board for all decisions involving public events near private property. She had attempted to organize a small event without consultation, only to be stopped by other board members. Her reputation for overstepping had become well known, and she had been forced to acknowledge her previous mistakes. The landowner observed these developments quietly, satisfied that lessons were being learned at multiple levels by midday. The educational group had settled into lunch breaks and smaller discussions. The landowner used this time to inspect the hives and ensure everything was in order. The bees moved methodically, tending to their work as the sun moved across the sky. Each hive was a small, thriving community. The landowner reflected on the parallels between human behavior and the organization of the bees. Cooperation, respect for roles, and attention to boundaries were essential in both worlds. After lunch, the landowner organized a guided walk along the property's perimeter. Visitors learned how bees navigate the importance of flight paths and how environmental factors influence their behavior. The landowner pointed out the reinforced fences, the brightly marked warning signs, and the safe observation areas. Every feature was explained clearly, emphasizing safety, respect, and harmony with nature. As the group moved, one adult questioned the landowner about the previous chaotic camping event. The landowner recounted the experience calmly, without blame or anger. They explained what had happened, why the bees reacted defensively, and how the situation had been resolved. Visitors listened intently, some expressing amazement at the complexity of the interactions between humans and nature. The story served as a clear example of consequences, preparation, and the importance of respecting boundaries. By mid-afternoon, the group had returned to the starting point. The landowner gathered everyone for a final discussion, summarizing the day's lessons. Respect for nature, careful observation, and following instructions were emphasized. Visitors shared their reflections, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to learn in a safe and structured environment. The landowner encouraged continued curiosity, but reinforced that boundaries were non-negotiable, and safety was at stake. As the visitors departed, the landowner walked along the fence line, inspecting the hives once more. Everything was in order. The bees moved calmly among the flowers, unaware of the lesson they had helped teach. The property was peaceful, and the balance between human activity and nature had been maintained. The landowner felt a sense of fulfillment. Knowing that knowledge and respect had replaced chaos and misunderstanding, that evening, the landowner reflected on the journey from the first chaotic camping event to the present. The bees had remained safe, the property had been protected, and the community had learned valuable lessons. The HOA Karen had been held accountable, and new rules ensured that future events would be planned responsibly. The landowner recognized that patience, observation, and calm leadership were as important as physical barriers and warning signs. The landowner also considered the broader implications. The bees had shown that small creatures could deliver powerful lessons about boundaries, respect, and cooperation. Humans had responded in different ways, some with carelessness, some with understanding, but ultimately, the lesson had been learned. The property, the community, and the bees had all benefited from careful planning, attention to detail, and thoughtful guidance. By nightfall, the landowner completed a final inspection of the hives, noting activity, health, and safety measures. The sun set quietly over the property, casting long shadows across the fields and hives. The landowner felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The bees thrived, the land was safe, and the community had learned to respect boundaries. The chaos of the past had been replaced with understanding, harmony, and steady progress in the following days. The property continued to host educational visits, all carefully planned and supervised. The landowner shared lessons about the importance of respect for nature, responsibility in human actions, and the consequences of ignoring boundaries. The bees continued their work, thriving in their environment, and the property remained a symbol of careful balance between humans and the natural world. The story, once marked by chaos and conflict, now became one of learning, reflection, and growth. The landowner's patience, attention, and calm leadership had ensured safety and harmony. The HOA Karen's overreach had been addressed, and the community had learned the value of listening to those with experience and knowledge. The property and its bees continued to flourish, serving as a reminder that respect, preparation, and understanding were keys to coexisting peacefully with nature, circling constantly, moving in small waves, signaling that a larger defensive action could occur at any time. By late afternoon, more minor stings had been reported. Panic spread further. People ran without thinking, knocking into others. Food and belongings were left behind in the rush. The landowner moved quickly to secure the hives and prevent further incidents. They wore protective clothing, used smoke gently to calm the bees, and continued guiding the campers away from danger zones. The HOA representative was nowhere to be seen at this stage. She had left after the first reports of stings, leaving the landowner as the only person actively managing the crisis. The campers were frustrated, the parents were angry, and the landowner remained calm, moving through the chaos with a clear focus on safety. As evening approached, the situation slowly began to settle. Most campers had retreated to safe areas, some had packed up entirely, and emergency services had assisted those who had been stung. The bees, sensing the reduction in disturbance, began returning to normal activity. The landowner checked every hive, making sure no damage had occurred, and noting every detail for records. The landowner finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe. The day had been exhausting, stressful, and chaotic. But it had also confirmed something important. Boundaries must be respected. Warnings must be heeded, and nature cannot be controlled through authority alone. The campers had learned a harsh lesson about respecting the land and its inhabitants, whether they realized it yet or not. That night, the landowner documented the events carefully. Photos, notes, and observations were compiled for future reference. It was a long day, and the aftermath would require attention. But they knew they had done everything possible to prevent a more serious outcome. The bees were calm, the hives intact, and the campers, though shaken, were mostly safe. The quiet returned once more, but it was different now. The land had endured a day of chaos, and the lesson had been delivered in a way that could not be ignored. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but the landowner was ready. Nature had a way of teaching lessons, and sometimes it required humans to listen carefully to understand them. The bees had spoken, and their message was clear. Respect is earned, it's not assumed. The morning after the chaos began with a tense silence. The campers were quieter, many still shaken from the previous day. The landowner walked carefully along the edge of the property, checking the hives and observing the surroundings. The bees were calmer now, but the memory of their defensive behavior lingered in the air. Emergency services had left the campsite. After tending to the stings and calming panicked campers, a few families had packed up and left early, deciding that the risk was too high to stay. The landowner noted each departure, recording what happened and who had been affected. Every detail mattered, both for their own protection and for any future accountability. The HOA Karen finally returned, but her mood had changed. She walked onto the property with an air of defensiveness, her usual confidence replaced with caution. She had received multiple complaints and calls from campers and parents who had been stung. For the first time, she seemed to realize that the situation was serious. But instead of acknowledging her role, she tried to shift blame, pointing fingers at the landowner and the bees themselves. She said that the campers had no idea what they were doing, and that the hives were the real problem. The landowner listened quietly. They had expected this. Karen had authority in the community, but she lacked understanding. Calmly, the landowner explained what had happened step by step, showing notes, photos, and the documented warnings that had been placed days earlier. The landowner emphasized that the bees only reacted to agitation and that all instructions had been ignored by both campers and the HOA representative herself. Karen's frustration grew. She tried to interrupt, claiming that the landowner was overreacting and that the HOA had every right to approve the event. She insisted that safety measures were the responsibility of the landowner and that no one should have been stung if proper supervision had been in place. The landowner remained firm, explaining that the responsibility for planning and controlling an event of this size fell on those approving it, especially when private land and live beehives were involved. Campers slowly began emerging from tents, still cautious. Some approached the landowner to apologize, admitting that they had ignored warnings and that they now understood the risk. Others stayed back, unsure whether to speak or move away. The landowner moved among them, reinforcing safe areas, explaining what had occurred, and emphasizing respect for boundaries. They remained calm, measured, and patient even as frustration built inside. Authorities arrived later in the morning. A small team of health inspectors and safety officers conducted inspections of the campsite and the surrounding property. They spoke with campers, parents, the HOA representative, and the landowner. Evidence was collected, including photographs of warning signs, flight paths, and placement of tents near the hives. The authorities listened carefully, asking questions and taking detailed notes. During the inspection, it became clear that the HOA representative had overstepped her authority. She had approved an event without proper safety checks, ignored known hazards, and failed to consult the landowner. Her attempts to shift blame were met with skepticism as evidence mounted. The landowner had been methodical, documenting everything, and their clear, calm explanations helped the authorities understand the situation fully. Meanwhile, campers slowly began leaving the area in small groups. Many had earned a lesson the hard way. Some were embarrassed by their own carelessness, others frustrated with the chaos that had occurred. The landowner guided them, ensuring no one accidentally disturbed the hives again. They made clear boundaries and reinforced the importance of respecting both nature and private property. By afternoon, the situation had stabilized. The remaining campers were gathered in safe zones under supervision. The landowner ensured that every action was deliberate, preventing further agitation of the bees. Smoke was used carefully to calm the hives, and no additional stings occurred. The landowner remained vigilant, aware that even small disturbances could trigger defensive behavior. In discussions with authorities, the landowner explained the importance of respecting flight paths, keeping clear distances, and listening to warning signs. The inspectors took the information seriously, making notes for a formal report. It was clear that the landowner had acted responsibly, anticipating problems and taking preventive steps. While the HOA representative had been negligent in her oversight, Karen attempted to defend herself again, suggesting that the landowner could have done more to prevent incidents. But witnesses, campers, and documentation contradicted her claims. The authorities gently but firmly indicated that the responsibility for the event's safety fell on those approving it, not on the landowner protecting their property. The evidence was undeniable. Throughout the day, the landowner remained a steady presence. They spoke calmly to campers, authorities, and anyone involved, reinforcing the lessons learned. They explained that nature is not easily controlled and that ignoring warnings leads to predictable consequences. The bees had acted defensively because their space had been violated. The campers' stings were unfortunate but avoidable. Respect and preparation were essential. By evening, the event was winding down. Most campers had departed, leaving behind empty tents and scattered belongings. The landowner walked the property, checking hives, repairing minor damages, and making notes for improvements. They had prevented further incidents, protected the bees, and ensured that the land was safe once more. The HOA Karen faced calls from other board members, campers, and local authorities. Her authority was questioned, and she was instructed to review her actions and provide an explanation. The landowner watched from the sidelines, satisfied that careful planning, patience, respect for nature had prevailed. Boundaries had been maintained, and safety had been prioritized. Despite the challenges, that night the landowner documented the day in full detail. Notes, photographs, and observations were organized meticulously. The experience would serve as a reference for future events and as proof of responsible action. They knew that accountability was not always immediate, but careful preparation ensured fairness in the long run. The landowner finally allowed themselves a moment to rest. The bees were calm, the property was safe, and lessons had been delivered. The chaos of the previous day had given way to reflection, understanding, and resolution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But the landowner had proven that patience, knowledge, and respect for nature could overcome even the most difficult situations. As night fell, the property was quiet once more. The hum of the bees returned to its normal, soothing rhythm. The landowner stood at the edge of the hives, looking across the open field. The events of the past 2 days had been intense, stressful, and chaotic. But they had also reinforced an important truth: respect. Preparation and calm leadership could prevent disaster, even when authority and understanding were lacking. The landowner smiled quietly. Knowing that the bees were safe, the lessons were clear, and the boundaries would never be ignored again. The morning after the event indeed brought a sense of calm and quiet over the property. The campers had mostly left, the tents were taken down, and the scattered belongings were cleared. The landowner walked slowly along the edge of the property, observing the hives and the surrounding area. The bees were active, moving peacefully among the flowers, showing no signs of agitation. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of just 2 days before. The landowners spent the early hours checking every hive. They ensured each box was intact, that the bees had access to food and water, and that none of the structures had been damaged during the event. Everything was as it should be. The bees had been resilient, but their reaction had been a clear warning about respecting boundaries. The landowner made notes on improvements for the future, considering stronger fences and clearer signage to prevent similar incidents. The HOA, Karen, had already begun facing the consequences of her actions. Calls from board members and local authorities had required her to explain how she had approved an event so close to private property without consulting the landowner. She attempted to defend herself, but the documentation and evidence provided by the landowner left little room for argument. Photographs, notes, and witness statements painted a clear picture of negligence on her part. Meanwhile, campers shared their experiences online and in conversations within the community. Many admitted they had underestimated the danger of disturbing the bees. Some shared stories of minor stings, lessons learned, and newfound respect for nature and private property. The landowner's careful handling of the situation had prevented serious injuries, and people were beginning to recognize that calm leadership and preparation made all the difference. The authorities involved in the investigation finalized their report. It concluded that the responsibility for the safety of the event lay primarily with the HOA and the organizers, not the landowner. The HOA, Karen, was instructed to review her procedures and was temporarily suspended from approving events till proper guidelines were put in place. It was a small victory, but an important one. Respect for private property and safety rules was reaffirmed. In the days that followed, the landowner worked quietly to reinforce the boundaries around the hives. They installed taller fences, added more visible signs, and clarified safe zones. They also shared knowledge with nearby residents and campers, explaining the importance of flight paths, quiet movement, and respecting warning signs. The goal was not to punish anyone, but to prevent future problems and maintain a safe environment for both humans and bees. The community began to show a shift in attitude. Campers and neighbors expressed gratitude for the landowner's calm and patient handling of the situation. People who had once ignored the warning signs now took the time to understand why they were there. Respect for the hives and the land grew, and the stories of the event became a cautionary tale about boundaries, preparation, and listening to experienced guidance. The landowner reflected on the experience. The chaos had been stressful, exhausting, and challenging, but it had also reaffirmed important truths. Nature is not something to control, it is something to respect. Boundaries exist for safety, not convenience. Calm, careful, and informed actions can prevent disaster even in difficult situations. The bees had delivered their lesson clearly. Humans had been reminded of their responsibilities. The HOA Karen slowly faded from the conversation, or authority diminished. The community board implemented new procedures for events, requiring consultation with landowners and safety inspections before approval. It was a step toward ensuring that future incidents would be prevented and that respect for private property was a priority. Months later, the landowner watched the bees as they worked among the flowers. Children from nearby families came to observe, asking questions and learning about the importance of bees. Campers from previous events returned, this time guided carefully by rules and proper supervision. The land had regained its peace, and the lessons of the past remained clear in everyone's mind. The property stood as a reminder that patience, preparation, and respect could overcome chaos and negligence. The landowner's careful attention had preserved the hives, educated the community, and reinforced the importance of boundaries. The bees continued their work unbothered, and life returned to its calm rhythm. The story ended not with anger or revenge, but with understanding and respect. Nature had its rules, humans had their responsibilities, and when both were honored, harmony was restored. The landowner smiled quietly. Knowing that the property was safe, the bees were thriving, and the lesson had been learned by all who had witnessed it. Weeks had passed since the chaos of the camping event, but the landowner could still feel the echoes of what had happened. The bees were calm now, moving peacefully among the flowers. Yet the experience had left a mark on both the land and the community. Life returned to its slow, predictable rhythm, but the landowner knew that true safety came from constant attention and careful planning. The property had become a small point of interest in the area. Neighbors came to learn about the hives, curious to see the bees from a safe distance. The landowner welcomed the visitors, explaining the importance of boundaries, flight paths, and quiet behavior around the hives. People listened attentively, clearly absorbing lessons that had been ignored during the event. It was satisfying to see genuine understanding replace ignorance,